Hello everyone, I am Dr. Ramesh Gumasa, Assistant Professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at SR University, Warangal. In previous lecture, we discussed about environmental studies and its importance and few definitions and basic concepts on ecosystem and types of ecosystem, definitions of ecosystem followed by the structure of ecosystem, right? Today we are going to discuss trophic levels and energy flow in an ecosystem. So which is one of the most fundamental concepts in the environmental science and ecology. By the end of this session, you should clearly understand how energy enters and moves through the ecosystem, what trophic levels are, how food chains and food web functions, and how ecological pyramids represents these relationships, right? So how energy enters and moves through the ecosystem, and what are the different trophic levels in the ecosystem, and how food chains and food web functions in the ecosystems, right? So this topic is not just theoretical, it directly explains how ecosystem remains stable or collapse. So now we are moving to the slides. So for which is starting with ecosystem functions. In earlier lecture we discussed about the basic definition of ecosystem, right? So now think what is ecosystem function. When we talk about ecosystems, there are many processes happening simultaneously, right? So when we talk about ecosystem, there are multiple processes which is happening simultaneously, right? But two functions are absolutely fundamental. Two functions are absolutely fundamentals. So which are, one is energy flow and other is nutrient cycling. Right. There are two fundamental concepts in the ecological functions. First one is energy flow and second one is nutrient cycling. Now here where most students make a mistake. They assume that both behave similarly. Right. Energy flow and nutrient cycling not same. So this is not correct. Right. Nutrients, like you can see examples are like carbon, nitrogen, and which we can recycle continuously. Like these are the resources. Like nutrients are like carbon, nitrogen, so which are recycled continuously, right? So they move in a cycle process, in a cycles. They move in a cycles, but energy behaves different, right? These are the nutrients like carbon and nitrogen which are recyclable in a continuous process. They move in a cycles, but the energy behaves differently, where energy enters once and keeps moving forward, so that the energy will be reduced at each stage, right? So the materials like carbon and nitrogen, which is the recycled process, we can continuously recycle, but the energy behaves in the ecosystem are different. So the energy enters once and which is move forward, and in each step there is reduction in the energy, right? So this difference is the foundation of ecological structure, right? There is energy loss from one stage to other stage. So this difference is foundation of ecological structure. Why, can you think? Because energy is not recycled. Because energy is not recycled. Ecosystems always depends on continuous external input, right? So there is a drop of energy from one stage to another stage. So this is the foundation of ecological structure. So the drop of energy because it depends on continuous external inputs, right? So you can see the concepts of energy in the ecosystem. So which is required for all life process, like for growth, reproduction, and movement, right? So the primary source of the energy in the air, uh, which is from sun. Sun is the primary source of energy. So now we are moving to the next slides, which is based on the energy flow. So every organism requires energy for survival, right? Every organism requires energy for survival, whether it is growth or reproduction or movement or even maintaining internal body functions. So everything is depends on energy, right? Every organism requires energy for survival in different process like reproduction, movement, and movement and maintaining the internal body functions. So everything is depends on the energy only. Now the important point is organisms do not create energy, right? Organisms do not create energy, they only transform it, meaning that so organism does not create any energy, but it can transform from one state to other state, right? So the ultimate source of this energy is this begins with the sun. The ultimate source of energy is the sun. Almost all ecosystem on the earth depends on the solar energy, right? So all ecosystem on the earth which depends on the solar energy. Without sunlight there is no entry point of energy into the system, right? So without sunlight there is no entry point of energy into the system, so that there is no life, right? So the energy begins with the sun, which moves through the living organisms and which is it as a heat. So you can see the importance of energy flow, so which drives all biological process, right? Every organisms require energy, and we can maintain ecosystem functioning as a balance with the help of energy flow, and which supports life activities, so which determines ecosystem productivity, right? So this is the importance of energy flow in the ecosystem. So now we are moving to the energy flow. So as we discussed in the previous slides, the source of energy is the sun, right? Sun is the primary source of energy. So energy flow, which describes like how energy moves through the ecosystem. So energy flow is nothing but how energy moves or transformed through the ecosystem from one state to other state. So it begins with the sun, right? Sun is the primary source. So it begins with the sun. Then it moves into the plants. Like plants are the primary producers. Then it is move into the animals. Like these are the primary consumers. And finally, which is leaves in the ecosystem as a heat, right? Primary at last output is heat. So this is not a circular movement, it is a one-way flow, like it is a unidirectional flow. So once energy is lost as a heat, it cannot be reused in the ecosystem, right? So which is a unidirectional process. So once energy is lost as a heat, it cannot be reused in the ecosystem. So the energy flow which controls the entire functioning of ecosystem. Energy flow which controls the entire functioning of the ecosystem. So it determines how much life an ecosystem can support, right? So first important points, it determines the how much life in the ecosystem can support, and it also controls productivity, population size, and survival. So this is very important. It controls productivity, population size, and survival. If the energy flow is disrupted, the system become unstable, right? If the energy flow is disrupted, the system becomes unstable. So when we study about the ecosystem, we are essentially studying how efficiently energy is captured and transformed in the ecosystem, right? So you can also see, so the source of energy from the primary source is sun, and solar energy is foundation for all ecosystem. And the entry of energy into the ecosystem, you can see starting from the sun to producers like plants. And plants utilize this solar energy like sunlight, and it can produce food by the process of photosynthesis, right? Solar energy is converted into the chemical energy in terms of developing some food, so using the photosynthesis process, so that the primary producers like plants can use the sunlight to produce food. And energy flow, you can see the typical flow chart. So where the sun is primary source of energy, and which is utilized by the plants, and plants to next decomposers, plants to decomposers, or plants to primary consumers, and primary consumer to secondary consumers, and secondary consumers to decomposers. So which is a unidirectional process, which is starting from the sun, sun to plant, plant to decomposer, or sun to plant, plant to primary and secondary consumers, followed by the decomposers. So you can see the energy transformation from sun to decomposers. Okay, energy enters to the producers like plants, which using the photosynthesis process for developing or for generation of food. So this food is further utilized by the uh, other consumers like primary consumers and secondary consumers. So these consumers are completely depends on the plants like producers, right? So energy enter the ecosystem through the producers, mainly plants. These organisms capture sunlight and convert it into a chemical energy through the photosynthesis process, right? So this is the only point where energy enter into the biological system. Okay, so the first point is the energies enter into the ecosystem from sunlight to plants. So next you can see in photosynthesis, plants which absorb sunlight and which can be used by the sunlight, and it can convert into carbon dioxide and water into glucose, right? The final output from this photosynthesis process is glucose, like useful food material. This glucose stores energy in a chemical form, right? So you can see in a simple form where the plants which absorb the solar energy like solar heat, so which can produce glucose, which is a food, right? So instead of thinking of plants as a food producer, so think of them as energy converters. Like you can see sun is producing the heat, and plants are converting in a useful form, right? Solar energy to glucose. So there is energy converter, right? So they convert solar energy into a another form of energy, right? They convert solar energy into a form of other organism can use, right? Solar energy convert into other kind of energy. So once energy enters into the system, it flows through the different levels. So once energy enter into the system, it flows through the different levels. So you can see from this figure, so from the sun to producers, so the energy enters into the system from sun to producers like plants. Then it is moving to the consumers like primary and secondary consumers, followed by the decomposers, right? From sun to producers, then consumers to decomposers. So at each stage, energy is transferred but not completely, right? At each stage, energy is transferred but not completely transferred. So a large portion of energy is lost at every stage. At each stage, there is loss of energy, right? So this is the energy flow process, which is a unidirectional process. So there is a loss of energy at each stage. So energy flow, which has three important characteristics. So first, it is unidirectional. So the energy flow is unidirectional. It does not return to the starting point. So it does not return to the starting point. And second, it is not recycled. So first one is energy flow is unidirectional, meaning that it cannot return to the starting point. And the second, it is not recycled. So once if you use energy, it is lost, right? And third point, energy decreases at each step because because of losses in the form of heat. So because of the respiration, movement, etc. Right? So the energy decreases at each step because of respiration and movement. So this continuous loss is limits the number of trophic levels. Okay, so there is trophic levels in the ecosystem. At each trophic level there is loss of energy because of this respiration and movement of the energy, right? So you can see the nature of energy flow, which is unidirectional and not recycled, and energy is lost at each step in the trophic levels. So in the further slide we can discuss about trophic levels. So you can see the typical figure of trophic levels in the ecosystem. So you can see producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, followed by the tertiary and quaternary consumers. Right. Trophic levels, which represents the feeding position of organisms in ecosystem. Right. So which in a simple definition, trophic levels which represents the feeding position in the organisms of ecosystem. So this represents stages of energy transfers at each stage in the ecosystem, right? So there are different stages starting from the producers to consumers. So each level shows the energy transformation from the uh, producers, from the original source. We can say that original source. So you can see the first source is producers. Producers are the first trophic level. So for producers are the first trophic level, so which is also called as autotrophs. So which is also called as autotrophs, meaning that they can produce their own food using sunlight. Okay, producers which are also called as autotrophs, so they can able to develop their own food using the sunlight with help of photosynthesis process. So they form the base of ecosystem, right? So they form base of all the ecosystem because all energy is available to organisms which is originate from them, right? So which is the base of all organisms. So producers are the base of all organisms. And next is primary consumers. Primary consumers, which are nothing but herbivores, which depends on the producers. So primary consumers are herbivores that depends on the plants. So their food is depends on the plants. However, they do not utilize all the energy in the all the energy present in the plants. Okay, a large portion of energy which is lost during the digestion and metabolism process, right? So they cannot completely utilize energy from the producers, but there is a amount of loss in energy because of the digestion and metabolism process. So even at this stage energy transfer is insufficient, right? Inefficient and insufficient amount of energy transfer because of loss of energy because of digestion and metabolism process. So you can see the second trophic levels. Examples are like grasshoppers, bee, and butterfly, etc. So which are completely depends on like plants, trees, grass, flowers. And coming to the next trophic level, like which are secondary consumers. So secondary consumers, their food uh, based on the herbivores. So their food based on the herbivores, since they depends on organisms that have already lost the energy, right? So because the energy is transferred from producers to primary consumers, but the transferred amount energy is lost in the primary consumer stage. So the transfer of another energy from primary consumer to secondary consumer is less, right? So the available energy loss will be more with the increasing the stage, like producers to secondary consumers. So you can see the examples of secondary consumers are rat, sparrow, frogs, etc. Right. So next trophic level is tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers, which are second most predators, which are second most predator in the ecosystem. So these are the highest level in the predators after the quaternary consumers. So by the time of energy reaches to this level, only very small fraction of original energy transferred because of the energy loss. So there is a small amount of energy transformed to the stage, right? From secondary consumers to tertiary consumers, the energy transformation or the energy passing, which is less. And next one is quaternary consumers. So quaternary consumers, which are the apex predators. So which are the highest level in the trophic level in the ecosystem, right? So highest trophic level. So which are predators. So these are apex predators. They exist in very small numbers. So they exist in very small numbers. Why? Because the energy available at this level is extremely limited, because the available energy is less. So the availability of energy is less. You can also see from this figure the key observations, the structure of trophic levels in the form of pyramid, right? You can see from producers to quaternary consumers, the structure of trophic levels is in pyramid structure. So the base is widest, like producer, you can see the base is widest. So it indicates maximum amount of energy. So the base is widest because highest energy is available, and the top is narrow in terms of quaternary consumers because the available energy is less or least, right? So as we move upward from producers to quaternary consumers, the energies decreases and the number of organisms also decreases. Like you can see there are there are more number of producers, but you can see at the quaternary consumers which is less, right? The number of organisms also decreases as the trophic level changes from producers to quaternary consumers. So this pattern is not random. It is also direct results of energy loss because this pattern indicates there is energy loss in the trophic levels in the ecosystem, right? So the key observations you can make a note. The base is widest because of highest availability of energy, and the top is narrow because lowest amount of energy, and the energy flow is unidirectional and which is not recyclable. So this is the pattern indicates that there is loss of energy. So next one is related to the energy loss, so which is discussed in the previous slides. At each trophic level, energy reduction which we can observe. So small amount of energy which is passed to the next level, next trophic level. So one trophic to another trophic level, there is a chance of there is a loss of energy, right? So the loss is due to because of the metabolic process, movement, and heat production. Right. The reason you can make a note, the loss of energy because of metabolic process, movement, and heat production. You can see the example, the producers which is having 100% of energy, but which is transferred to the primary consumers in terms of 10% only, meaning that 100% of energy, only 10% of energy is available, and 90% of energy is lost during the transformation process. Coming to the primary to secondary consumers, the energy lost, you can see almost 9% have lost in the energy. Similarly, in the tertiary and quaternary, so the availability of energy is fractional, like 0.1 percentage and 0.01 percentage respectively. Right. So there is huge loss of energy in each trophic level. So you can see 10% law of energy transfer. So this is lead to because of the metabolic process, movement, and heat. So only 10% of energy which is passed to the next trophic level. So 90% of energy which is lost because of the heat, respiration, and movement. Now you can see the role of decomposers in energy flow. So what is decomposers? Decomposers nothing but which break down dead organisms. So which break down the dead organisms. So they release energy as a heat and recycle the nutrient back into the ecosystem. Right. Decomposer which break the dead organisms and they release nutrient as a they release heat and they release nutrients in the ecosystem. Okay. However, they do not recycle energy. Okay. However, they do not recycle energy. Energy is always lost from the system. Okay. The main role of decomposer in the energy flow is so which break down the dead organisms and they release energy as a heat and they recycle nutrients which is back into the ecosystem. Okay. And other important point is they do not release energy. So energy is always lost from the system. Right. So now you can see the significance of energy flow. So as we discussed in the previous slide, energy is transferring or passing from one trophic to other trophic level. At each trophic level, there is a chance of loss of energy because of the because of the movement and the respiration, etc. So you can see the significance of energy flow from this slide. Energy flow which maintains balance in the ecosystem, right? Energy flow which maintains and which balances the ecosystem and it regulates population sizes, which regulates population sizes and which limits the food chain length and determines the overall efficiency. Okay, which is important. You can see energy flow which maintains balance in the ecosystem functioning because it regulates population size, which limits the food chain length and which determines the overall efficiency. So without controlled energy flow, without controlled energy flow, ecosystem cannot function properly, right? So without controlling the energy flow, the ecosystem functioning not properly, right? So proper functioning of ecosystem, the energy flow is crucial. So the energy flow which is varies from one trophic to another trophic level. At each trophic level, there is a loss in the energy. So final the loss of energy in terms of heat. So which is starting from the producers like plants, there is a 100% of availability of energy from plants to primary consumers. So the energy is passing from one stage to another stage, like producers to primary consumers, there is 10 percentage, like 90 percentage loss and 10% availability of energy. And primary to secondary consumers, so which is again decreased to 9 percentage of energy, so the availability of energy is only 1 percentage. And primary to secondary to tertiary consumers, you can see the availability of energy is less. So as the trophic level increases, there is energy loss. So this energy flow, which is important for ecological balance, so it controlling the population size and maintaining the food chain, and which determine the ecosystem efficiency, right? Thank you.